Our first speaker this morning is Zoe Wimshurst. Zoe and I worked together briefly at the University of Chichester, where she was the experimental officer and ran the consultancy arm, and so I got to know a lot of what Zoe does. But she was an ideal choice for consultancy, and I have a page here because the list of her clients is extensive and I could not possibly remember them all. So she has worked with British Olympic Association, Harlequins Rugby Football Club, GB Hockey, British Shooting, Formula 1 drivers and pit crew, the Premier League, county cricket teams, Danish handball, professional golfers, and just for something a little bit different, Nordic anti-terrorism units. So all the activities that you're going to see today have been developed and applied in a wide range of different situations. So we should have something that everybody can take to their environments. Zoe's record in her client list speaks for itself. But that doesn't mean that Zoe and I agree on everything. As Ed said yesterday, we're about promoting discussion and healthy disagreement. And Zoe and I do disagree a little bit on the mechanisms why what she does works. So there's no denying that what she does is very effective and works, but we always get great discussions about why. What are the mechanisms responsible for this? And I always learn when Zoe presents the latest research in her area and the reasons why she does what she does. And that's an extremely valuable thing for me, to be able to challenge my assumptions and my understanding. So I'm delighted to be able to invite Zoe here so she can share with us today. And finally, I'd just like to thank Crazy Catch. So some of the items that you see in front and some of the items that Zoe is going to be demoing today. Zoe's talk is sponsored by Crazy Catch, so you will have an opportunity to interact with some of these. And after Zoe's session and in some of the breaks, they'll be moved over to this section here behind me on the right. So anybody who does feel like having a play around afterwards, you will be able to get access to some of these. So, I think that's enough for me. Without further ado, please welcome Zoe Wimshurst.
For inviting me to speak today. I'm really excited to be here. I think I come from a slightly different background to many of the different presenters and probably from a lot of you guys as well. So I think I've already learned a phenomenal amount from listening to the speakers and you guys in the breakout sessions as well. And I'm excited to learn for the rest of the day too. As Phil said, some of what I say may not fit with your kind of the skill acquisition traditional view of things. However, I think some of it really does. I think that my presentation is not going to have the triangle in it. I feel like I've missed out slightly there. But I do think that a lot of what I'm actually doing thinks about manipulating the individual aspect of that. Sometimes manipulating the task as well, but perhaps more often manipulating the individual. So it does kind of fit into that constraints-led approach in many ways, although perhaps in some ways it may not. I'm open to questions and talking about that later on to see how what I do does fit in. So just to... maybe I haven't turned it on. Sorry. Anyway, the next slide just says how I'm going to go through things. Anyway, so I'm just going to... perfect. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my journey to how I got to where I am. As Phil said, I've been lucky enough to work with a phenomenal range of athletes from a whole range of different sports. So I'm just going to tell you kind of how I got to where I am. And then I'm going to look at the visual system in sports performance and how I break it down into 3 different areas. We're going to have various demonstrations going on throughout. As said, a lot of the stuff I'll try and get you guys as involved as possible. But everything that I show or do today, I will put over in the area there, and it'll be there for the rest of the day. So feel free to go and have a play around with any of it once the session's over later in the day during any of the breaks. So everything will be there for you as well. So my background, I've always identified myself as a hockey player. I started playing probably as soon as I could walk. My whole family did, and I thought, I play hockey, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And then I realised that actually, no, you can't make a career out of being a hockey player, particularly not when I was at an age where I could have been good enough to do that. So I had to start thinking about what I did want to do instead. And I remember at one of the England camps I was at when I was quite young, there was a psychologist came and spoke to us, and I thought, well, that seems like a pretty good job. You sit and watch sport a lot, and then you just talk to people. Pretty sure I could do that. So that's kind of where I decided to go on and study psychology. So I studied psychology at the University of Surrey, then went to Loughborough to do my master's. But I kind of discovered during that time that perhaps I wasn't built as being the best psychologist, I don't really like listening to people that much. And like when they're feeling things, I don't care about what people feel. I just want them to get on and do things and perform well. I don't like questionnaires from people. I like to experiment and kind of get what I think is hard results on what is and isn't going to work. So all my work started to focus more around the perception side of things and how the information that you're taking in can influence how you actually then go on to perform. So a lot of my research is focused around this area because I'm really keen to try and make sure as much as possible what I do has science behind it. Yes, some of it just seems to intuitively work because it kind of, to me, makes sense that if you can speed up or make more accurate what you're putting into the system, you're going to give yourself more time to make a better decision. But just being intuitive isn't really good enough for me to justify taking it to some of the best athletes in the world. So I really want to make sure that as much as possible either I'm doing research to back it up or I'm supporting and finding research to make sure what I'm doing does have that scientific backing to it. So I've done a lot of research into the skills of elite athletes, whether they can be trained, whether that training does transfer onto the pitch, which is the most difficult thing to try and prove. But in my PhD I looked at that quite a lot. I've looked at the brain function of athletes and whether that differs depending on the sport that you play. I've done a little bit on eye tracking, expert novice differences. I'm also interested in eye tracking coaches as well to see whether what you as a coach are looking at is going to influence the feedback that you give to people. And also I'm doing a little bit of research into concussion and stress and vision as well. So kind of a broad range of different areas that interest me that I think can all add together to help our athletes. So my applied work, as I said, I've worked with a whole range of different people, been very fortunate in that. It started when I was doing my PhD and I needed some athletes to do my research on, and being a hockey player, I'd already used a lot of my friends who happened to be very good hockey players in my research. So I wrote to Great Britain Hockey to say, I'm just applying for some funding, do you mind if I put your logo on what I'm doing? Because I do a lot of research in hockey. And some woman in the office wrote back to me and went, I'm sure that's fine. So I just used it. And then about a week later I got an email from the head coach at the time of the men's England and Great Britain programme. No, you can't use our logo, we need to make sure that the research you're doing is good enough, which I totally understand, but I kind of already used the logo on what I wanted to. So I thought, do I really need to bother with this? But he asked for some examples of my work and I sent it through to him. And from that initial conversation it led to me being invited to consult with the Great Britain team on the build-up to the Olympics, and that was before the Beijing Olympics in 2008. And then I went on to work with the Great Britain team for the next 6 years. Whilst I was working with them, I got a random phone call one day going, hi, this is Clive Woodward. It's not. One of my friends taking the mickey out of me. But it turns out it was Clive Woodward, and we met and had coffee because he was interested in the fact that someone was doing visual training in the applied environment. And that led on to him funding the rest of my PhD, and I went to work for him at the British Olympic Association, and I worked there for a number of years before I decided to kind of branch out and set up my own business, Performance Vision, so that I could work with a broader range of professional athletes as well as the Olympic athletes too. So I've had a very fortunate experience, I think, in just happening. I think I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, but hopefully I've had enough to back it up to make the most of it. So just going into how I kind of think about my applied work. I tend to think whenever you mention the word vision, everyone has a different idea on what you mean by vision. In psychology terms, everyone thinks, oh, it's planning for the future. Obviously, I'm talking about your visual system, and I try and break it down into the input, so the eyes, the processing, so the brain, and the output, the motor system. And I've presented it here in a linear way. I don't actually think it works in a linear way. I think there's feedback and kind of communication in all the different areas. But it's just kind of easier to present it in this way to you today. And lots of the areas overlap as well. But this is sort of how I'm going to progress through the presentation, going from the input through the eyes, what we can do about that, why it's important to make sure that they're working properly before you think about the other areas that build on from there. And then we'll get through to the output, which is what the area that most coaches are interested in, how it actually translates onto the pitch and how the body responds to what the visual system is processing beforehand. So if we start off looking at the input, so what the eyes are doing, how we can use them to our best advantage. Each of our eyes are controlled by 6 muscles. They're skeletal muscles, so they work in the same way as your hamstrings, your biceps, in that they will adapt to the stresses and strains that you put on them. You don't need these eye muscles to really be stronger than they are as such, but you can train them to work at faster speed, in better coordination with each other, and also for longer periods of time before they start to fatigue. I'm just going to get you guys to do a brief demonstration just to show you. You might think eyes fatigue only like at the end of a really, really long day. But if you hold your hands just outstretched like that, about shoulder width apart, thumbs up in the air, and all I'm going to get you to do is with your head still, is just move your eyes from one thumb to the other and back again. And we're going to go as quickly as we possibly can for around 30 seconds. Now I want you to count how many times you can do that in this time. So I'll tell you when to go. So you're going to go as quickly as you possibly can. So there and back counts as one movement, okay? So off you go now. Good, head nice and still, that's good. It's interesting looking around the room. Some people's eyes are definitely moving at different speeds to other people's. Okay, you're over halfway through now. Last few seconds. And relax there. Okay, so some of you may have noticed that your eyes do start to feel a little bit tired from a really short period of time, but making your eyes work really hard. And hopefully, when you're playing your sport, you aren't just going to be looking at a ball as it moves around the pitch, but you will be scanning around, and perhaps not quite that intently, but the sport's going to go on for a longer period. So if you are using your eyes as quickly as you possibly can, they will fatigue because those muscles will start to fatigue. Also, just out of interest, so just so we get an idea of how different people's eyes do move, who got over 30 of their eye movements? Okay, so more than half of you. Anyone get over 50? Oh, okay, over 40? 1 or 2 people. Okay, so we're going to see, you can compare yourselves up, so maybe 3 or 4 people got over 40. But most of you were kind of around the 30 mark, I'm guessing. So already in here, for people who I'm assuming don't do anything to train your eyes, you're doing around about 30, but big differences already. So you can see that there are vast differences in how quickly those eye muscles do work in people that just occur from your experiences and that you've had so far, in the same way that some people's biceps might be stronger or not. So, just a little fact for you. Did you know that everyone has a dominant eye? It's going to feed the information to your brain a split second quicker than the other eye. It's also the eye that you're aligned to. So if you do a target sport like shooting, playing snooker or pool, things like that, you're probably naturally aligned to that eye anyway. But it's really important in fast ball sports as well, because if that eye is going to feed the information to your brain a split second quicker, if you've got a bobbly ball coming towards you, you want to make sure that that eye is going to definitely be having the best possible view of the ball. So we've had people, rugby's a really good example because the wingers quite often do stay on their wings. So we've had people who maybe played on the right wing, but they're right eye dominant, so they're getting a lovely view of the crowd, but the eye that's closest to where the ball's going to be coming at them from is just going to be ever so slightly, we're talking milliseconds, slower at getting the information to their brain. So if they have time to turn their body, so both eyes have a clear view, brilliant, that's the ideal scenario. You don't always have that luxury. So you want to make sure that your athletes are playing in positions where their dominant eye is getting the best view to the ball. Similarly, in sports like cricket, say you're right-handed, but you're right eye dominant, you might need to make sure your head is turned that little bit more, just so that your right eye is having a clear view to where the ball comes from. For most people, it's relatively easy to work out which your dominant eye is. You can make a small triangle like that with your hands, and stretch your arms out. So with both eyes open, if you look through the triangle and line up a target in the middle, whatever it may be, one of the letters on the wall or something like that, and then if you keep your head and hands still but close one eye at a time, you should see that with one eye open, your target is still nicely in the middle, and with the other eye open, it will have shifted way out to the side. For most people that will work, not everyone. If you have an astigmatism, sometimes it can give a dodgy reading for that, but for most people that's quite a basic way of working out what the dominant eye is. So around 70% of the population are same eye and hand dominant, and about 30% are cross-dominant. I happen to think that if you play a sport where you've got a stick, a bat, a racket in your hand, you're at an advantage if you're cross-dominant just because of the way your stance would naturally be. That's just kind of my theorising. There's no evidence to show you necessarily would be. but for target sports, having the same eye and hand dominance is going to be an advantage as well, because you'll line yourself up exactly where you need to be. So again, it's just worth knowing, thinking about your athletes. Do athletes tend to fumble a ball if it's coming more at them from one side? Do they tend to pass one way more often than the other way? Because you will naturally just have slightly better awareness on the side that your dominant eye is at. So it's worth thinking about that it could be an underlying thing that helps your athletes to become the players that they are. So if you're thinking about this input system, there are errors that can happen in this. I'm just going to give you a case study as we go through of each of the different examples. And the case study for the input issue was working with an athlete who was, he's a hockey player, he was in the Great Britain squad, so he's a very good player, he's kind of on the fringes of that squad, but in most of the kind of exercises and things that they did, he was pretty good. He was one of the best in the squad. But whenever they played small-sided games at the Great Britain hockey camps, he was awful. And the coaches couldn't work out why there was this big dip in performance. So he got sent to me to try and investigate. And I decided to send him to see an optometrist because, for some reason, he'd never had his eyes tested, which is a bugbear of mine. So if you haven't had your eyes tested in the last couple of years, go and get them tested. But anyway, we sent him to the optometrist and he had a thorough examination. And it turns out that this guy was colourblind. He was blue-yellow colourblind, which is slightly rarer than being red-green colourblind. So he hadn't worked out that when the coach handed out bibs for their training games, they were blue and yellow bibs. And so to him, they pretty much looked like the same colour. So he wasn't the sharpest tool in the box to ask the coach, why are all the bibs you're giving out the same colour? And he just got on and played and never really knew who was on his team in those small-sided games. So what is a really simple thing that most people should be able to find out if they're colourblind actually led him to having big problems because he didn't think to question it, and once we discovered what the issue was, then it was relatively easy to correct for him. That wasn't until at the London Olympics when they decided to change hockey pitches from being green to being blue and to play on them with a yellow hockey ball. And that pitch led to all sorts of problems as well in the reflection of the light and things. So yeah, don't mess around with the colours that you play on, because it could lead to all sorts of problems in your athletes that you wouldn't think about otherwise. So it's worth making sure that your athletes all go and see an optometrist, just get their eyes tested. You never know what problems there may be underlying it that you just wouldn't know about or wouldn't think about. So some of the issues that some of your players display may not be down to technical issues. Sometimes what they're suffering from is an underlying problem. And so it is worth making sure your athletes go and have an eye exam. It's also possible to think about how if someone has a deficit in one area, but they might be exceptional in another area, they just kind of come out as kind of average in between. So I had an athlete I worked with who, on all the kind of reaction type exercises that we did, when he was playing, he was pretty good. He had quite quick hands, so he didn't really make very many handling errors. He was quite quick on any exercises that we did, but we managed to work out through breaking his system down, because he was never really progressing at the speed we thought, that his ability to process the information, so getting the information from his eyes to his brain, was quite slow, but then from his brain to his hand was really, really quick. So if we could break it down and just speed up the visual input side of things, then he would almost be displaying an exceptional ability. But because that was quite slow, no matter how quick his hands and the muscular reaction was, he was kind of hitting a wall on how well he could progress. Knowing how your visual system, the eye muscles work, is all very well and good, but your brain is going to be telling your eyes where they need to point. And one thing I'm going to demonstrate to you now is that the brain doesn't always listen to what, your eyes don't always listen to what your brain is telling you. So I've got a few of these, I think there's about 10 of these. If we just kind of have one within like a group of people. So this is called a Brock string. If you kind of, I take one to demonstrate with, and then you can just kind of take one within a little group and pass them around. Yeah, yes, thank you. So what you have here is a string just with 3 beads on, and if I'm going to get you to demonstrate for me, please. So all I want you to do is hold the end of the string on your nose. Okay, so this isn't just to make people look stupid. But then you kind of space the 3 beads out quite evenly. And what I want you to do is just focus your eyes on the pink bead that's closest to you. Okay, so what you should start to see if you're doing this is that it looks like there's 2 strings going in and 2 strings going out. They kind of form a cross. And the point at which that cross meets in the middle is the point that your eyes are actually focusing at. So hopefully they're crossing nicely in the middle of the pink bead. Perfect. Okay, for many people what they'll see is that actually it's crossing slightly in front of the bead or slightly behind the bead, which on the distance like this is relatively small. You think, oh, it's kind of a millimetre or so ahead of or behind where I think my eyes are focusing. But if you translate that into a high ball coming towards you, and your eyes are actually focusing slightly in front of where the ball is, it's going to lead to all kinds of issues when you're trying to make a catch. It's going to hit your chest and kind of bounce out first, which is an issue you see relatively often in those cases. Thank you. So that's called a Brock string. It's just a way of working out to see. So I'll just pass them around and say I'll leave them lying around so that people can kind of have a go. You can see how if your brain is actually focusing, your eyes are focusing where your brain is telling it to you. So you tell your brain, look at the pink bead, look at the pink bead, look in the middle of the pink bead. But actually quite often, you're not necessarily looking at the place that your brain is telling your eyes to. So there are various things that can affect this as well. So if you're particularly stressed or tense, sometimes that will affect where those eye muscles are focusing, the same way as tensing any other muscle group might affect what's happening. So sometimes just some deep breathing can help relax the eye muscles. We'd also use the strings like this for changing your focus quickly. So you move your focus quickly from one beat to the next and back again to make sure that those eye muscles are able to move quickly and accurately from one place to another. Again, this is something that I might do if an athlete was particularly fatigued as well, so you get them to do something physically hard and then you do this and you'd want to make sure that their eyes are still lining up to where they think they would be. And sometimes you do see quite extreme differences, so the athlete will actually see 2 beads in where they think they're actually focusing, but it's actually 2 beads that they're seeing, so it's not, their eyes are not focusing where their brain thinks it is at all. So another method that's used quite a lot to try and identify where people are looking is eye tracking. And eye tracking is a really, really great tool in a lot of ways for showing where the eyes are pointing. So there are lots of different technology now. You can get eye trackers. It's basically like a pair of glasses with a battery pack attached to it. And then you get some nice footage afterwards to show kind of where the athlete's eyes are focused. And I'll show you a video of that in a little bit. But that can't actually tell you things like this really basic Brock string can about what the eyes are actually focusing on and the information that's being taken in. And also, just because the eyes are looking at something doesn't mean that the brain is necessarily taking it in. So if we just play the first video, please. So we're just going to do a little test now. If you've seen this before, then just kind of play along with it. And we'll just see how your awareness is.
How many passes does the team want to make? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking there?
Okay, so obviously, if you've seen that before, once you've seen it once, it's really like you will see it every time. And I'm not in any way suggesting that there's going to be moonwalking bears on the sports field that your athletes are not going to see. But it's really interesting to note that sometimes I've had people watch that video clip and similar ones with an eye tracker on, and they seem to look at the moonwalking bear, but because that's not what they're attending to, that you don't notice it. So again, it's about thinking when you're on the sports field, what is it that you want your players to attend to that could give them the best possible advantage? And that's going to come down to your tactics, but it's worth thinking about. Just telling a player to get their head up, have a look, might not be enough. So there are various tactical things that you could really take advantage of if you work and train them. So for example, in sports where you don't have rolling substitution, so football and rugby are the best examples. Say a player's just taken a knock and so they're slightly injured but they don't want to sub off, they're just going to see if they can run it off. Well, if you're their opponent, do you not maybe want to try and take advantage of that and target them for the next few minutes, really test them, see if they are going to struggle? So maybe that's something that you could put into a training session, have someone who is identified as a weak player, a player who's just had a knock, and you want everyone on your team to scan and see where that player is so that you can take best advantage of it. Similarly, depending on the tactics of your opposition, maybe they have a right back who really likes to get forward and high a lot of the time, but that means that if you have a quick turnover of the ball, they might be caught out of position, you can take advantage of that space. But you're not going to be able to do that unless as a team you know that when you're looking up and scanning, checking to where the right back is one of the key points that you want to look for. So you can kind of work on your tactics and build the vision into it if you're telling people what they should be looking for. Interestingly, back in the day now, when England won the Rugby World Cup, they had these big signs put up everywhere saying CTC on them. And from what I've heard about it, no one really knew what this CTC stood for. They kind of assumed it was just another advertising thing. But it was something that the England team worked on with their visual coach, Cheryl Calder, at the time. And CTC stood for Crossbar, Touchline, Communicate. And so they'd worked out a visual strategy that they wanted everyone in their team to follow. So wherever you are on the pitch, you would look up, the first thing you would look at is the crossbar on the goalpost that you're shooting for. Then you'd scan to both touchlines, so you're taking in the width of the pitch. Then you communicate with the people next to you. And because particularly in rugby, the person on the ball at the bottom of a ruck is going to have the worst vision on the pitch because they've got their head down. But if you know that everyone on your team is scanning to the same places, looking in the same places that you would, perhaps you're going to trust them when you say, the space is right, just go right, and that kind of thing. So they developed this as one of their main tactics, was so that everyone was scanning to the same places, identifying the space on the pitch, and then communicating to each other. So we have another video now just to show you kind of the eye tracking side of things and how some of the expert eye movements may differ from those of other people.
Probably around between 80 and 90% of the information he's taking in will be coming through his eyes.
There's no doubt that Ronaldo's feet are fast and effective, but what part does his mind play in this ability? The eye trackers show intriguing results. On the replay, the little red dot shows exactly what Ronaldo's looking at.
You'd expect a lot of players to be focused on the ball the whole time. With Ronaldo, he did look at the ball a fair amount of time, but he was much more looking around, looking at the defender and taking in the information from his body, and also scanning for the spaces beyond the defender.
On the other hand, Tom's forced to take his eyes off the ball because he doesn't have quite the same ability to predict where the ball is going.
To actually see what's going on, we need to sort of have 1/3 of actual speed. That's how fast Cristiano is, so you know the chance of the 8 seconds, he bought 13 moves on it. Okay, and we're not just talking kicks to the ball, we're talking step over, spins. Oh, it was beautiful. So you can see here on the gauge data, you can see he's concentrated on the ball. What you'll see, the interesting thing, is when he wants to go past you and look at how you move it, he's predicting where you're sort of going to be, and he's looking for movement in the hips to sort of plan his next move.
So he looks at the ball, then he looks at where I am, and then he executes his trick.
So it comes in, looks at your foot, looks at the other one, up to the hip. Really accurate, precise, sharp movement. And then when we look to watching you, you're mostly trying to follow the ball, which means you're only ever going to be able to react to where the ball is moving rather than anticipate in advance anything that he's going to do. So you're always going to be that one step behind. And also your line movement you can see is much more all over the place.
Oh wow, it's looking more like a pool than you're constantly chasing it, basically.
And I bet if you asked him, he probably wouldn't know what it was that he was looking at. It's all in his subconscious. He knows where he's picking up the information that's going to best help him. And without even thinking about it, he's looking for those angles of your knee and your foot. And obviously it's working pretty well for him.
Okay, so you can see from that kind of what the eye tracker shows you and how it does give quite a good insight, but it's obviously has its limitations as well. So playing football with a little backpack on your back and some basketball is going to impact on how natural people are able to perform. But I think it's quite beneficial in some ways to give insight into how these athletes perform compared to novices who wouldn't be able to get otherwise. So just to move on to the processing aspect in the brain, so we've kind of linked a little bit between the two, the visuals, the eyes moving into the brain. Now we're going to look a little bit more about the way the brain processes the information. So in the brain, the eyes feed all the information through a occipital lobe at the back of your brain, and that then splits the information into two separate pathways, the dorsal stream and the ventral stream. And one of those is interested in what it is you're looking at, identifying the object, and the other one is interested in where that object is in space. So in sport, obviously you need a combination of both of these pathways to work together, and this information is then combined together in the frontal lobe, which is where we make decisions. But it takes the brain time to process information in this way. The information has to travel a long way through lots of different structures in your brain. Now, it actually takes your brain about 1/10 of a second to process what your eyes are seeing, which in sporting terms is definitely enough time for you to get hit in the face with a ball. But this rarely happens because your brain kind of guesses about what is happening, but it does also mean that it's possible to fool your brain, which is what lots of different visual illusions do. So if you look at the spot in the middle of the board, I'm just going to make you all look really stupid. If you focus on the spot in the middle, then kind of move your head forwards and backwards, kind of as if you're a chicken pecking at something. You all look really silly right now. But what you should start to see is it looks as though those blurry blobs around the outside are all moving outwards. Hopefully you're all getting that. So the reason it does that is because your brain's going, ooh, they look blurry. I'm moving, so I'm going to assume that they're moving really fast away from me, which obviously isn't happening, they just happen to be blurred and still, but your brain has to make a best guess at what is happening in order to be able to not get hit in the face by a ball and other things that make us be able to interact with the world in the way in which we do. Similarly, it's not just your visual system alone, as this video will show, that other senses all combine together as well and can be fooled relatively easily. Okay, so hopefully you all experienced that. In the first clip, it definitely sounded like he was saying bar. In the second clip, far. In actual fact, it was exactly the same audio clip being played both times, but because of what you were seeing, the way his mouth was moving, your auditory system then kind of imprinted on your brain, and this is what I'm hearing. It's not actually the sound that it's listening to. So again, it's really easy to fool all of your different senses, and particularly your visual system tends to override all of the other ones. So again, thinking about it in sporting context, if you've got someone on your team who's yelling at you to do one thing, but you're thinking that's not what I'm seeing, because you've all looked at different places, you're looking at different information, then it's quite easy to then have conflict in a team, because one person thinks you should be doing something, but you've seen something else. So again, working on kind of visual strategies as a team could potentially help reduce those kind of errors from happening. So just back to the slides. There are different things that can impact the way that you process information, and lighting conditions is one of them. It can affect how quickly the brain receives information. I'm just going to pass around again. There's, in these bags, if you just take one and pass them on, there's kind of one lens of sunglasses in here. There's about 30 in here, so there'll be enough for a fair number of you, but not everyone. So once I've shown you this, then pass it on to someone else. So what I want you to do is get the sunglasses lens and just hold it over one of your eyes. Keep both your eyes open, but just so that your eyes get used to seeing slightly different light input from each eye. And all that's going to happen is, I'm just going to kind of walk up and down, and all I want you to do is look at the pendulum as it's swinging from side to side, or have one going at the other end as well once the lenses get down that way. So just kind of walk up and down. So the pendulum is just going backwards and forwards, but what you may start to see is that it looks like it's going in a circle rather than just side to side. Not really hypnotising all of you. So hopefully you should see that it does look like it's going in a circle. Once your eyes are adjusted to the different visual conditions, it will become much clearer. Okay, so it really is just going backwards and forwards. Okay, the reason that it does that is because the eye that has the sunglasses lens over it is receiving the information a little bit slower than the eye that is having the light that's available in here. And we've got pretty dim light in here anyway, so it's already relatively difficult for you to see clearly. But the way that your brain makes sense of that, instead of just thinking, oh, my eyes are seeing different things, it has to think, oh, the pendulum must be further away from me at some time. And so that's why it looks like it's going in a circle. So sometimes it will look like it's closer and sometimes further away, because the sunglasses are slowing down how quickly your brain is receiving that information. This is called the pull-frick effect. It's just a scientific effect that occurs. But again, in sport, it can be really, really important. So you think of seeing cricketers playing with sunglasses on. Addy just did some research quite a while ago now where they actually looked into what sunglasses cricketers were wearing to see if it was having an impact on how well they were able to field. And it seemed that the cricketers were just choosing the sunglasses that they thought looked pretty cool on them, instead of actually any scientific evidence behind it. And since they did that research, you'll see a lot more cricketers now wearing the orange lenses, because they still help protect your eyes from the sun, but don't slow down as much, because they're not blocking out as much light, they're not slowing down the visual information as much. So again, if you're playing in bad lighting conditions, you're more likely to see handling errors from people. If you're training under floodlights that are particularly poor, and so players are going into and out of bright lights and darker lights, you will see errors occurring, and it isn't the players just not concentrating properly. There is this visual difficulty that they're going to have because the lighting conditions do affect the way that your brain can process information. So if we just have a think about another processing issue, so another case study that I had. I had a rugby player who played on the wing, so a big part of his job was to catch a high ball coming at him, but he was notoriously bad at catching a high ball. And again, the coaches did lots and lots of repetitions, probably just repetition after repetition, on trying to help him catch the high ball. Nothing was really working. So again, we looked at that to see if there were any underlying visual problems. And what we found was that one of his eyes had the smallest prescription possible that you could ever require for that eye, and the other one was seeing completely normally. So they were just slightly imbalanced. Many people would have exactly the same prescription, but no problems, so wouldn't need any change at all. But we decided to try him with a contact lens just in the eye that had the deficit in to bring them back up to level. Then we did lots of training with things like the Brock string to retrain his eyes and brain to work in better combination together to look into the right places. And actually we managed to turn around and he became very, very good under the highball just because that visual imbalance and his processing of what he was seeing, because each eye was seeing something slightly different, if we corrected that, then it made him much better at what he was able to do. So one way that I work quite a lot with the athletes on the processing side of things is to train them under overload. I think that the more you can overload both the visual and cognitive systems in training environments, when you get to playing in a match situation and you've freed up those areas, you're going to be able to perform much better. Some of the things I do will just be to purely overload the system. Some of them can be tailored to have some technical benefits as well. So we're just going to do a little demonstration for you of an example, kind of a generic example of something that I might do in different sports. I would make it more sport specific if I was with a particular team, but for the purposes of this, we're just going to make it relatively genetic. So I think I need about 6 volunteers, please. You're just going to play a little game of sort of like netball in the middle here. So if we can have 6 people stand up, please, that would be brilliant. Okay, we have 3. We need a team of challengers to take on the team of 3. Okay, so the first thing to think, just as if we thank you very much, we can get 2 more people up here. The first thing to think is who's playing on which team. Normally, you'd put some nice bibs on people to show which team people are on. But if we want to make it more challenging, then you might want to think, well, in my sport, where do I want people to have to look? So for this game, all I'm going to do is on 3 of you, put a little bit of yellow tape on your wrist. Because for this game, you're going to be catching a ball, so we might want our athletes to focus on the hand position of people. In hockey, we might put a bit of tape around the head of the stick because you're quite likely to signal with the stick where you want people to go. And sometimes you might want people to look at the head, so put a nice bit of tape on the head. And instead of a nice bright colour, now you're going to have to scan a little bit more carefully to see where the people on your team are. So all I want you guys to do is just with the ball here, 3 against 3. The yellow team are going to score by catching the ball against the crazy catch net down there. The other 3 are going to score down here. So like netball, you can't run with the ball. So just get the ball passing around between your group of 3, trying to score where you can. Okay, so whilst they're playing the game, the next thing I'm going to introduce to them is just a little bit of cognitive overload. So as you're playing, as you normally have been, I'm just going to walk around and hold up some numbers as I go around. All I want you to do as an individual, so no, in this example, no helping your teammates by calling the numbers out, is just add up the numbers that I hold up whilst you continue to play the game. Okay, so I'm just going to walk around, we'll do it for about 30 seconds. Okay, and hold it there. So, anyone get a total of the numbers that were held up? You guys don't have any, sorry. Anyone anything at all?
16.
Oh, all wrong, it was 15. So Alan was closest, but okay, so again, it's just an example. You're playing the game normally, but you're getting people to get their head up. In this example, I was down the side of the track. It's not that realistic of where you'd want them to scan, but depending on your sport, you would place people holding up numbers in a position that you would want people to start to scan to. So it could be behind the goal, on the touch lines, that kind of thing. And then you can make it more difficult once they're quite good at scanning for the numbers. So you could have, where you have to add up the green numbers and then take away the red numbers. I'm not going to get you guys to do that, don't worry. But it's just so that you're creating overload. So really, really simple sums, get someone to look where they need to and then have to add up or take away in their head. Really simple thing that you can add to any of the drills, not drills, small-sided games, things like that you might be doing anyway, but it's just going to add in some visual element and create some overload for them as well. Got one more example that I'm just going to get you guys to do in the game here. Okay, so this time we're going to have another ball as well. So there's a white ball and an orange ball. So the yellow team score with the orange ball. The non-yellow team score with the white ball. So now you're going to have to think about, am I just aiming to score? Am I also trying to defend against the other ball? So there's almost two games going on in one. So you need to think about, are you just defending, are you attacking as well? Where are you scanning? You can't just look at the one ball and you can't knock it out of the way. So you can't just look at one ball, you have to continually look at the other ball as well. Decide, are you just going to be an attacker or a defender too? And it creates quite a lot of chaos. Okay, and we'll call it a day there. Thank you very much. You guys we'll give you guys a round of applause. Thank you very much for helping out. But just some examples of some really simple ways to overload the visual and the processing system that you could do in any different sport in any different way with no real equipment needed, but once you take those elements out, it's going to free up all that extra cognitive load so that you're going to hopefully be able to perform much better. Got one more video clip just to show you quickly. Again, this is just thinking about how you can create load on an individual. This is a particularly difficult way to create load, but a lot of research has been done on advanced cue utilisation, and this is trying to put it in a slightly more applied way.
It's almost as if they're doing maths in their head, even though they wouldn't be able to describe it to you.
Ronald wasn't actually quite that bad. He could make some kind of connection with it, but they were like, can you just make it look like it's really impossible? But Ronaldo genuinely was that good. The last one that we did was just one take and then we didn't bother doing any more because it was really that good. So yeah, it's just to show you how, again, you're able to... you're able to put load onto the individual aspects to make it more difficult for them. So we're going to finish off with going through more of the output side of things, so the muscular system, which are some things that you guys may sort of integrate into things that you do anyway, but I'm just going to give you a few examples of things that I might do with the athletes that I work with. I've also got some bits that aren't necessarily part of my demos, but I will leave over there. So for example, I have several pairs of Strobe Glasses. So I'm not in any way sponsored or affiliated with any of the equipment I'm showing you here. It's all just stuff that I genuinely think is quite good and useful. So the Strobe Glasses can be worn and they just have it sounds a strobe light in them, so it just limits the visual information that's coming into a person. So you can have them doing a relatively normal exercise, small game, whatever it may be, but it's going to limit what they can see to make it that much more difficult for them. Similarly, quite often I might just use an eye patch over the non-dominant eye of someone to try and force them to get their body positioned so their dominant eye can always see what's going on. Or things like dimming the lighting conditions to make it that much more difficult for them than it would be in bright light. Can we go back to the slide? So there's lots of different things that you can do. So, as I say, some of it is relatively high-tech, but there's lots of stuff that's really easy to do. Get someone to wear a pair of quite dark sunglasses while they're doing some training, and it's going to really make it much more difficult for what they're doing. Whilst this side of things is really important and is perhaps the most useful area for progressing those skills on the pitch and integrating into match play, I do think it's really important to consider the input and the processing systems before you think about the output, because some of the case studies I've told you about, or some of the things, the way that the brain and the visual system works, there are lots of issues that could come up in those areas that wouldn't necessarily be cured by just working on this output system. I kind of think of it the same way as if you've pulled one of your leg muscles, you wouldn't necessarily go out and play in a game. You'd go and see a physio to make sure everything was working properly before you go out and do that training. And particularly the stuff in the input part of the system is kind of like that. Make sure that all your muscles are working properly first before you then try and put extra stress and strain upon them. So just the final case study I'm going to tell you about for output is an interesting one. So it was another athlete who was at the elite level. They were playing internationally at their chosen sport. And it turned out that they just weren't making the passes that the coaches thought that they should be making. And so they said, well, we really need to know why this is. Is it because his peripheral awareness is really bad and so he can't identify the passes? Is it that he's not able to move his eyes quickly enough to do it? So we did lots of kind of quite basic testing to see how big his peripheral field was. Was he able to see those passes? And we managed to identify that actually there was no underlying reason at all. There was no problem with the input or the processing at all. So why was it that he wasn't making these passes? And after sitting down and having a good conversation with him, we realised that actually he was just an arrogant bugger and thought that he was better than all of his teammates. And so he wasn't passing to them because he thought he had stood a better chance of beating the defender and setting up good opportunities than if he passed. But if we hadn't been able to test those underlying problems, because he was saying, oh, I just don't see the pass, I just don't see it. And so he was kind of blaming those areas where actually we could do the testing and show, no, your peripheral awareness is definitely fine. There is no reason why you shouldn't see those. So once we could throw that information back at him, he did finally admit and go, yeah, I see them. I just choose not to pass to them. So again, it's quite useful sometimes to be able to throw that back at an athlete. So last thing I'm going to do with you guys is just show you a few little bits of the different stuff I do. Again, it's going to be a bit of a forced situation here, but hopefully you'll see some ideas of things that you could make more applied to your sport when you're doing it. So just some examples. So can I please start off with small crazy catch net? So we'll have Alan on this, and anyone who feels like they can try and catch a rugby ball reasonably well. Anyone? Thank you very much.
The American has to shout.
Yeah, come on guys, this is a bit embarrassing. I'll move this one out of the way a bit. So all I want you to do to start off with is we're going to imagine that you're scoring at that end of the field, so we want your body to stay more or less focused that way. You're just going to throw against a small crazy catch net, and as it comes back to you, make a catch.
Front rows, be very careful. I've already used this before.
See, first thing is the pass needs to be nice and accurate. We won't play into that one. Okay, so the pass can go in more gently to start off with, doesn't need to be a hard pass, but it's making sure that you made a pass and then you're immediately ready to try and make the catch from the pass again. But then you progress that on to the next level. So I'm just going to come stand around the back here. So Nick, what I want you to do is once you've made the pass, I'm up here, and I'm just going to hold some fingers up. I just want you to, between throwing and catching, and pushing a little bit now, just call out how many fingers I'm holding up, okay? Yeah. Okay, so I am making it, probably progressing on a little bit too early in the training session, but it is just to make sure that you're able to make a pass, scan ahead, and then catch the pass again. So again, it's sort of an overload situation, but we're thinking about what we want the athlete to do. We want them to be able to be looking ahead and then there to catch again. So you guys can relax now. Thank you very much. Okay, do we have any hockey players in the room? I know we have one. Do we have one more? Okay, so hockey sticky. Okay, again, so watch out if you're in the front rows. So all we're going to do is we're going to imagine that one of you is defender, one of you is attacker, whichever way you want it to be. Okay, so as a defender, all you're going to do is a little flick into the crazy catch net, and as soon as it comes back, it's a live one-on-one situation. So we're just imagining, say, it's a ball that has broken loose in the circle, and so the crazy catch is a good way of making a bobbly ball come back towards you. And so as soon as it bounces back, it's just a live one-on-one situation. Get the ball and try and keep possession of it. Okay, so once someone has possession, then just hold and just go against the other crazy catch net as well. Oh, showing off. Okay, so now if you just pass against that crazy catch net and then make it live again. Okay, so again, we think about progressing that on by having people scan to certain places. What I usually do with something like this is have the drill going on in the shooting circle, so the goalkeeper would be in their goal for this situation as well. And as soon as the attacker gets the ball, what I try and do is get the goalkeeper just to take a slight step towards one side of their goal. So as soon as you're going to take a shot at goal, you have to have identified where the goalkeeper has moved to and hit to the other side of the goal. So yes, the goalkeeper is slightly out of position, which isn't ideal, but then your striker is having to look up and see where the space in the goal is. And either they're going to hit that space and stand a better chance of scoring, or they're not going to hit that space because they haven't looked up or because it's poor skill execution. So instead of just telling your striker beforehand, I want you to aim at these areas, it's about getting their head up, scanning to see what's ahead of them and making the decision accordingly. Okay, you guys can relax there as well. We have just do one more small demo. So anyone who feels like they can catch a very soft ball which isn't going to hurt you if it hits you in the face, which it won't, it definitely won't. Anyone at all? Thank you very much. Okay, so this one is more, so if you come a bit closer, this is something that I would do sort of similar to this in rugby, but you can do similar things in hockey, but obviously you pass it along the floor. All we're going to do is kind of pass the ball over your shoulder, so it's going to simulate a ball coming down over your shoulder. To start off with, I'm going to shout whether I'm going to throw the ball over your right shoulder or your left shoulder. So you just turn and face the other way for me. Okay, so right. Okay, so sorry, it's coming over. I didn't explain properly. So it's going to come over your shoulder, and so you just need to catch it as it's coming there. Okay? So I'll call, so it will come over. So you should need to pretty much stay facing forwards, but as soon as I call, you can get your head up to look in the right place. Okay, so right. Good. Left. So pretty easy. Left. Okay, so it starts off pretty simple, and then I might progress it on. So now I'm going to call as I throw the ball, so you get the timing right, but you won't know which shoulder it's going over. Okay? Now, My bad try. Good catch. Now, good. Now, good. And rest there. You can sit down now. Thank you. So that's an example again. So again, you progress that on. Usually I'd have an athlete doing it maybe standing in front of a wall. So sometimes then you throw the ball against the wall and it will rebound back against them. So they can't just be looking up here. They need to have the awareness in front of them too. Sometimes you use different colour balls as well. So you have to catch the orange ball. But if it's the white ball, you need to evade out of the way. Or you progress on having numbers on the ball. So if it's number 1, you make the catch. Number 2, you evade, or 1, you catch with your right hand, 2, you catch with your left hand. So in some ways it is a bit of a false scenario, but you can make them much more game related and think about where you want your athletes to be scanning, what you want them to be looking at, and how the visual system needs to work in order to create those examples and best train the visual system to work in the best way for your sport. So really just to summarise, we've talked about kind of the input, processing and output system, which in a lot of ways ideally will all work wonderfully together, but there can be issues at each of the different areas. There are ways of training each of the different areas to improve them and enhance your athlete in the best possible way. And that's it from me. I will make sure I leave everything that I've shown you today will be over there for the rest of the day, so if you want to go and have a play around or try anything out, please feel free to.
So we're keen to stay on schedule, so we might have time for one question. If one person has a burning group question that we can ask. As Zoe said, she'll be around through the day. We'll have discussion groups through the day which we can pick up. The equipment will be over there as well through the day that you can play around with. But has anybody got any one burning question they'd like to pose to Zoe for the whole group to consider?
So, first of all, wonderful depth there. I mean, immense. But when we look at all the different strategies across the 3 different areas, obviously, yesterday I spoke about it, Mark spoke about it, and I know we'll hear the word again, context, right? So there's, some of this stuff is manufactured, some of it is very authentic to the context that occurs. So, just generally speaking, how do you balance trying to put something in an ecologically valid context or representative context, but also still work with some of these nuanced pieces to get the vision to, let's say, be a bit more creative or open to the areas that you want it to? How do you balance those two?
Okay, so I think it's a really good question. I think it's one of the things that sometimes is the most difficult to do. I think some of the input areas in particular, you can't necessarily have context for the same way that go see a physio, you're not going to have context as such. It's making sure the underlying areas work. But as you progress through, context does become more and more key to what you're doing. And I almost think that in many ways, I shouldn't be working with the athletes at all. I should be working with the coaches to input this visual stuff into what they're already doing. So I should sit down with the coach or observe their session, see what they're doing, go, oh, have you thought about just adding this in because it will add this overload? Or have you thought about doing this because this will just stretch their peripheral vision that much more? So I do work hands-on with the athletes, and in those ways I try and make it as context-specific as possible. But I think in an ideal, perfect world, I would work alongside the coaches, also sometimes with S&C coaches and things, because if athletes are going to be doing stuff to train their muscles to work under immense load, what's your visual system doing whilst you're working those weights, whilst you're doing squats? We could add things into that as well. When players are injured and coming back and rehabbing through injury, I could work with the physios that when you're doing balance, which has a key visual element to it to strengthen those connections, or I could just give them extra things to be doing to add in on top of that, because that way you're not taking extra time away from the already packed athlete schedules to specifically work on vision, and you're getting that context into what the athletes are doing. So it's definitely something I think about, and in an ideal world, I would just work with coaches and add it into what they're already doing.
Okay, so that's, thank you again to Zoe, very fantastic start for the morning. As I said, Zoe will be around through the day, the equipment will be over to the right. So there are 3 things you can do now. You can either go and have a look at some of the equipment, you can go get some teas and coffees, you can go have a look at the posters. You can, remember this is a movement conference, so you can walk to those venues, but that's very boring. If you want to be boring, please do walk. You can skip, you can gallop, you can sidestep, you can hop. Here's my challenge for you. This is a challenge I use quite a lot. For those of you who've all mastered your fundamental movement skills, watch closely, listen closely. Here's my challenge for how you get to your next venue. Start with a little skip, into a gallop right, sidestep right, gallop right, skip, gallop, sidestep. Any combination you like. I would like some funky, creative combinations, please. Let's not be boring as we move around the room this morning. Crazy catch venues, posters to read, teas and coffees. Welcome to Movement Skill Acquisition Day 2.